Hey guys, it's Tyler with TCG Rewind. Today I wanted to talk about Tengumainia 3. Now, if you don't know, Tengumainia is the biggest Tengu plant tournament we host in our server. We had around 40 people compete. I think it was exactly 39. And I wanted to do a breakdown talking about, exactly what representation we saw for the different decks and kind of do a top 8 overview. So we're just going to hop right into that. Real quick, as a reminder, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe on the videos. Help me grow the format. The whole point of me doing this is so I can help grow the 2011 format. And by growing the channel, that also helps get more people's eyes on the 2011 format. So it's a lot of help. That being said, let's kind of look. We have this chart here of all the different decks that were played. So we actually had a huge abundance of heroes in this tournament, which I find really interesting. We had 7 heroes, 6 like hero beat, and then 1 fusion gate heroes. And then we had 6 agents, 5 chaos, and then 1 monster mash. We had 3 Tengu plant players, 3 junk doppel players, 2 Falcon Punch players, 2 chaos. One was tomato chaos, the other one was piper chaos. We had 2 Gravekeeper, 2 fabled, randomly enough, 2 scrap, and then 10 others. So there was like 1 of each of these decks in the pool. So we had 1 TG Stun, 1 Jurak, 1 Worm, 1 Car Curry, 1 X-Saber, 1 KFC, 1 Nordic, 1 Disaster Dragon, 1 Watlock, and then 1 Stun deck. So we had pretty diverse representation here, although we really had small sample size for a lot of the decks. For example, one thing I want to talk about is we had 1 TG stun, and I actually watched that player. That was a friend of mine, Jesse Choate, so shout outs to him. But I watched him play throughout that bracket, and he actually had a very unfortunate bracket for TG stun, going against things like Nordic in the first matchup, which I don't think was terrible, but then he had to immediately follow that by going against X-Sabers, which I think is a really hard matchup for TG stun, and then immediately after that an agent deck, which can be really hard as well. But he had phenomenal matchups against heroes and even Gravekeepers, so it's kind of sad that he got the bracket he did, given that there was so much saturation in the pool. We had 2 Gravekeepers and 7 heroes, so there's like 9 total players that he had favorable matchups against. So that's a bit unfortunate for him, but I do think that maybe moving forward TGs might be a smarter meta call, just because of the fact that we really had like a lot of like control decks, and TGs are really good at dealing with things like heroes like Gravekeeper, just because all their monsters float, and Horn of the Phantom Beast is really powerful in simplified game states. That is usually brought up through back row, right? So but yeah, that's the breakdown. Now we can take a look. Let's look at what the top 8 was. So sorry for the spreadsheet, but I will have all the decks pulled up here. But we had Jaden Yuki taking first place with Tengu Plant. Now you might be thinking, oh hey, like business as usual for Tengu Plant, but honestly he's one of the he's the second person to win a tournament with Tengu Plants in this in our server. And he was actually got second place in the last Tengumainia. But shout out to him. He had to innovate the deck a little bit, change things up to try to make it function, catch some people off guard with some stuff. We'll look at his list and see what he did. But excellent player, well-deserved win. But like I said, it might seem like that's standard, but in reality it's kind of hard to win with Tengu Plants. It actually is a very difficult deck to pilot and win with, given how, especially what other decks were around it in this tournament. But in second place we had Bardak playing GK. GK's been popping up a lot in our tournaments lately and honestly performing really well. Another topping for GK. We had Heroes in third, and again we had 3 hero decks in top 8, so hero looking kind of dominant and strong as well. Venetus with a super unique X-Saber build, we'll get into that in a bit. And then we had Jin playing agents, 10-foot playing heroes, Brainpoke playing heroes, and then lastly we had Darksigner playing Falcon Punch. So for these two and these two, they were 7th and 8th and 5th and 6th, right? So there's one of these didn't place higher than the other. Darksigner got 7th or 8th. We didn't hard place that, right? So just so that's clear. But yeah, we'll kind of get into the list. We'll start taking a look. So okay, there we go. So first up here, let's look at Darksigner's list. He was playing Falcon Punch. This looks very similar to the one that won the last Tengumainia. Both him and Himne were playing Falcon Punch. Looks pretty standard. I don't really see any major changes. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's in the side deck. I I do like the spicy Trap Eater to deal with Decree sides. Getting a level 4 tuner can be kind of strong that just summons itself. And then I'm noticing Closed Forest in the side to deal with Gravekeepers, stuff like that. But yeah, for the most part, seems kind of like the standard list they already used before. I will say that this is something I kind of felt when I saw this deck perform. It performed really well the first time, and I think that was attributed to the fact that people didn't really know how the deck worked, so it caught a lot of people off guard. But I think as more people understand and learn how to play against this strategy, it becomes slightly less viable, where I think it becomes a bit less strong. And I think this tournament is a representation of that, where this deck won the last Tengumainia, and now it's like placing 7th, 8th at the highest when there are 2 represented in the pool. So I don't know, that's my personal take. But yeah, this basically seems very similar to the same list. I really don't know what was changed. I'm sure they'll let me know in the comments. But yeah. So then we'll take a look. We've got Brainpoke, who is playing heroes. So here's their hero build. We have pretty much standard hero stun, even opting for the skill drain. This is kind of interesting because I think a lot of hero players actually have decided to cut skill drain, because it's kind of like, in all honesty, it's a pretty underwhelming continuous trap card, or like an underwhelming floodgate. It really doesn't accomplish a whole lot against a lot of decks, and it's super easy to out with MST. So at most, this is just going to be a Veiler that costs you 1,000 life points. So a lot of people opted to just cut this. So it's interesting that they went with this. And then, yeah, we take a look at the side. I do like that they're signing the triple max C. There's no Veiler at all on the sides here, which is kind of spicy. That kind of runs the risk of getting blown out by Trishula. Heavy Storm in the side to catch people off guard. I don't know about the mind control side, if I'm being honest. I think Mindcon is either mained, or I don't really see a reason to side this. Like, it's nice. I feel like you should just almost always main this card, because it's really, really good. Even in Heroes, like, you can just make a rank 4 by stealing a Tengu or something, unless your opponent is literally playing 0 level 4s, which I can't really think of any meta deck that really doesn't, outside of maybe like X-Sabers runs very minimal, but even then they have a bunch of tuners you can steal. So I just feel like you either main this or don't run it. I don't think it makes sense to side. Soul Taker probably for the mirror, Super Poly for the mirror. The mirror is definitely very relevant in this tournament because we saw so many people playing heroes. But yeah, otherwise pretty standard hero stun list. Looks very similar to Joe's list, minus Dark Bribes, and obviously the addition of Future Fusion, which I do like having Future Fusion in the deck. There's no reason not to, especially because it has such good synergy with Hero Blast. But yeah, so next up we had 10-foot, and this was his heroes. So there's a bit of a difference between the two builds. Another hero stun list, but not really opting to go with the Floodgate. And interesting enough, there was no Starlight Road. Like, there's no fear of Heavy Storm in this deck. Opting to main deck Gores, basically as the punish. So it's like most people aren't going to assume you're running Gores in Heroes. So, and you know, he did, which is pretty cool. I like the Fossil Diana main deck. This card's really, really powerful. I think this card will start seeing more play, because in all honesty, it is very, very good. The flip effect that just destroys special summon monsters, catches people off guard, and can just blow people out and make sick comebacks. It's almost like a pseudo dark hole in some circumstances. I'm personally never a fan of triple maxi main. I think, especially if you look at our top 8 breakdown, like, let's see, Falcon Punch, Maxi's pretty dead against Heroes, Maxi's dead, Heroes, Maxi's dead. Agents, it's like good at stopping Venus, but that's about it. X-Sabers are really hard to Maxi, but I guess it's okay. And then Heroes, not relevant. GK, not relevant. And then Tengu Plant would be the only one that it's relevant against. So I personally can't say that I think maining triple Maxi is worth it. I think triple Veiler is almost always better. And then if you want to go for hand traps, the singular Maxi is fine. But I really don't think it's worthwhile doing that. And I think, you know, realistically, they probably got punished for using triple Maxi, because I just think there's a lot more cards that could be live. And yeah, especially against this top 8, I feel like this would have been very, very dead for them. But yeah, other than that, Super Poly. We're seeing a lot of Super Poly in sides just to deal with your opponent's stuff. We're running Dragon Knight, Draco, Equesti. I don't know how much this comes up. I've seen a few people run it. I honestly have never seen this card hit the field, but I genuinely wonder how useful this is. I'm sure it comes up against some synchro heavy decks. It's probably not a bad card. Like if you go against like a Dragoonity or something, I guess it could maybe come up a little bit more often than others, but still pretty interesting. I like that they opted to side skill drain. If you think you're in a matchup where you really hurt them with it, you side it in. Otherwise, you don't really mess with it. But again, this card's kind of risky. It's like hard to run Floodgates when you're not opting to run Starlight Road or Bribe or any protection from heavy. But yeah, pretty interesting list. Let's take a look. We have Jin's Agents, so that's over here. This is another relatively standard agent list, you know, just going super monster heavy, running the triple Herald of Orange Light, triple Space, and then the one trap being Treacherous. Some people opt to just do like Torrential plus Dust Shoot. Jin opted to just do Treacherous. I personally think maybe the Dust Shoot's just better, but and I also think Jupiter is a weird card to run. I just don't think this card's very good. I'm also not really a fan of Birdman, just because I think it it plays into max C. It basically gives your opponent something to max C when this deck actually has very few things that they can max C outside of just Venus, right? So I don't know how I feel about it. I wonder how this worked out for them. But overall, really standard agent list. It doesn't, like, we're running the Chaos Sork. That's kind of spicy, but you know, it's not, a lot of people do opt to run one or two of these in their build. And then looking at the side deck, we have, you know, 2 Cyber Dragon, 2 Thunder King. I'm not a fan of Crow anymore. I think without Dark World, Crow becomes a bit less strong. Also, I think Rivalry is a bit spicy, because I feel like this is pretty good against Tengu plants, right? Which is probably what this is mainly in there for. But I don't know if this hits enough things to warrant 3 copies, but who knows? Maybe it worked out really well for them. Double Decree, and then siding the Trap Dust Shoot. Again, this is one of those things where I think you either main it like over the Treacherous or you don't run it at all, right? I don't really see a point in just siding the one of Dust Shoot, because my logic with siding Dust Shoot and why I don't think it makes sense is if you want to see it going first, right? So at a most in a match, you're going to go first twice if you win the die roll, and then if you and then going first into game 3, like let's say you lose game 2, those are the only times you're going to see Dust Shoot, or want to see Dust Shoot going first. So like by doing this, you like basically only put it in for 1 game, and if it's only going in for 1 game, is it really that valuable? Probably not. I guess in theory you can put it in against monster heavy decks that always have a larger hand, but even then, I don't know. To me, it just doesn't seem incredible to side. I just think it's way better to just main and then side out in game 2s. But yeah, pretty standard agent list. Not shout out to them. They did take like 5th, 6th with this. I know it seems like I'm flaming. I'm just giving my nitpicks on the list. Either way, the deck performed really well, right? And making top 8 out of like 40 people is still very good. So yeah, next we'll go to Venetus, and Venetus had a very interesting X-Saber list. This was super unique. They're opting to run triple Fall Troll, which I actually kind of agreed with based on how this list was going. They ran 3 Reinforced Truth with the 3 Pashul. I really like this because in their back row build, it basically gives them a chainable back row to punish Blind Space or Heavy Storm, making it where you can kind of set a live back row plus a Reinforced Truth. And this is just like a stall tool where if your opponent gets aggressive and tries to like OTK you, you can just activate the Reinforced Truth, put a Pashul on board, and they can't attack over it. So kind of interesting. And then the triple nimble, super nimble Mega Hamster. I actually talked about this in the X-Saber channel. I was debating on trying out triple super nimble Mega Hamster because of the fact that I just think turn 1, this is one of your best plays. You set this, you get a Dark Soul. If you have a tuner, then you can like make Trish or make a Nat Beast, and it's really strong. Like one of the things I think is insane is thinking about it logically. If you're going against like Tengu plants, for example, you set a Mega Hamster, they attack in with Tengu, you flip this, you special summon Dark Soul. If you end phase Reinforced Truth, you now have a Trishula without normal summon, which is really crazy. That also gets you a search in the end. So yeah, there's a lot of weird potential with this. There's also just the whole thing of you set the recruiter and then you reinforce truth in the end phase, and now you have 2 monsters on board for fall troll without risking getting max seed, right? Because you can, let's say you end phase reinforce truth and then you have a Emmer's Blade on field. Well, now your opponent has to max seed before the inherent summon a fall troll, and it becomes really awkward and difficult for them, because if they max seed, you just don't have to summon the fall troll, right? So really, really cool list. This list actually performed well. I saw this list 2-0 the agent list, which is really, really impressive, because a lot of people say that agents is like an unplayable or very difficult matchup for this deck. Venice just kind of proved that wrong in this tournament. I like the side with the double Raikou to support the Mega Hamster. If you need specific spot removal, this is a good card to add in, and it kind of can catch people off guard as like a set in X-Sabers. Not a lot of people really run Raikou in X-Sabers. So Triple Decree, this is a bit iffy with all the traps they are running, but I do understand it. If you just side it in against decks that are super trap heavy, and if you have it on board, you're probably winning, and if it's not on board, then your traps are live, so it's whatever. But yeah, double light imprisoning mirror. Other than that, it's pretty... oh yeah, I guess one other thing we should talk about is Full Helm Knight. The one Full Helm Knight, and I feel like when watching Venetus's games, because we actually spectated quite a few on stream. If you want to catch the full VOD of this tournament, by the way, it's on my channel, so you can go take a look at it and watch the whole stream. But I felt like there are a lot of scenarios where, you know, when I looked at his list, I saw that they're only running one Full Helm Knight, and it is a bit awkward, because I feel like this is one of the best cards in the deck, and I also felt like there were a lot of times where they needed a 3-star tuner or they needed a Full Helm Knight, and because they only had one, it really turned off options. So I think maybe if I were to like adjust this list, I would maybe cut a rat and add like at least a second Full Helm, or even cut all 3 rats and just run 3 Full Helm, because this card is just so good. But yeah, I don't know. I thought that was really spicy. Also, there was no enemy controller in the list, which, again, enemy controller, in my opinion, is one of the best cards in this deck. It just creates so many unique plays and combines so well with Full Helm. But it does make sense not to run it in a list like this, where you're only running one Full Helm. So I definitely understand the merit and understand what they were going for. And it did work out really well. Like, this deck did place 4th, which is incredible. Especially as the only represented X-Saber deck, right? No one else opted to play this deck. So for the second time at Tengumainia, the only X-Saber deck entered did make top 8, which is really cool. So next up we have Lediobe playing Heroes. So yeah, it's this one right here. So this was the highest placing hero list. I definitely like the hand trap ratios a bit better. Going 2 and 2, I think it's fine. Again, I'm still a fan of 3 and 1, but 2 and 2 is definitely fine. Looks pretty standard. Interesting enough, we have Super Poly in the main deck, which I have no idea how relevant this was. I actually think Super Poly is kind of bad in this format unless you're playing against the mirror. Granted, having this in main deck, if you go against the mirror, is really, really absurd. This is also pretty good against agents, but I think versus like plants, most of the monsters they make are dark, and other than that, they're putting floaters on board, so it's kind of awkward. But this does have a couple different useful uses. No skill drain. They decided to side it. I like that as well. But overall, pretty solid, well-rounded list. I actually really like this one a lot. I think this one makes a decent amount of sense. This is the only thing that I would be unsure about. I don't know how that would have performed for them. But side deck, they're running 2 Compulse. I'm critical of this card. I don't think it's super good, but I do understand in like simplified game states, or when you're playing like, I guess, stun v stun, this card can be really like multiple, like can be kind of useful in multiple scenarios, like especially against the mirror. You can hit their shining. Adding the second Super Poly, the skill drain side, I definitely prefer that. Rivalry of Warlords, I think it makes sense in this deck, but you are kind of cutting off a lot. But realistically, you probably only have one monster on the field. Siding the Gores as well to catch people off guard, that's pretty unique. But I don't know how many applications this has, or like I really wonder how that performed for them. But yeah, again, pretty well-rounded list. Looks pretty good. Congrats on getting 3rd place. That's pretty nice. Then lastly, so we have in finals, our 2nd place finisher, we have Bardak, who is playing Gravekeepers. So this list looks kind of similar to Himne's winning list from the last tournament of like opting to run one Descendant, kind of looking for a Turbo-esque build to try to get to Royal Tribute as quickly as possible. I actually kind of like this Assailant. The more I thought about it, they went for double Assailant, one Descendant. The Descendant pop is actually relatively underwhelming, and I would guarantee you that this card outs more stuff for them than the Descendant does, right? So I actually really like this ratio of these are your like outs to get rid of things, but having one like destruction removal and then two like, hey, I can switch your monster to defense. I actually really like that ratio. I think it makes sense. They went for the triple upstart, one Wonder Wand instead of going for three, and then Allure of Darkness. Again, these are all just draw cards with duality, trying to turbo to Royal Tribute turn one, which I think makes sense. And then I do really like Rite of Spirit. Pretty much every GK player is opting to run this card now, and it makes sense. This card's really, really good. But yeah, and then side deck all looks pretty standard. I like the Lance because this is a really good way to like win the TG matchup. Is if you go against TG stun, this destroys Horn of the Phantom Beast, like blows them out of the water completely. And then two Malefic Stardust Dragon inside. I think that's pretty interesting. I don't know what they were citing that for. Maybe for the extra copies of MST that go in to try to protect your Necro Valley, but a lot of people just side closed Forest, so I don't know how useful this was for them. But yeah, I really like this GK list, actually. I think it's pretty well-rounded. I think it's a nice take. Very similar to Himne's list, but maybe a bit more refined. And yeah, overall, really like this approach. All right, and lastly, we went over this deck on stream, so if you were there, you got to see it, but we have Jaden Yuki's Tengu Plants. This is a pretty spicy version of Tengu Plants, right? They were opting to run double Dimension Prison and even a main deck Debunk just to play around people main decking Max C. They said that they felt that Debunk was, or like they felt that there might be a lot of people maining Max C, which is why they wanted to go for the main deck Debunk. So that's pretty interesting. But we did see this resolve on stream. The side deck is a mess. I don't even know. Like they said, they just like having one-ofs in the side for options, which, you know, maybe makes sense, but I can't even look at it. But either way, they played really well. Literally just won straight through winners. They went undefeated this entire tournament, which is really, really impressive. So that was really cool. Again, they got second place in the last tournament, in the last Tengumainia. So came back for the revenge to get first this time. But yeah, for the most part, it's relatively standard for Tengu Plants. The real spice just comes from these techs of Dimensional Prison, because I'm sure this catches people off guard, and it's really, really good against a lot of things, like especially with all the heroes in the pool. Having this to hit a Shining can be very, very relevant. But yeah, shout outs to Jay and Yuki, congrats to him. But that is going to wrap it up, guys. That is what our top 8 was. Let me know in the comments what you think of these decks. One thing I will say is something to think about moving forward into other tournaments, and kind of what to think about for the meta as it evolves. As I've always said, Tengu Plant's meta is very fluid. It kind of rapidly changes. We kind of can recognize that heroes are kind of on the up and up. We had 3 heroes in top 8, so a lot of people are tampering with this deck right now. That could mean maybe even side decking Kinetic Soldier or Soul Taker could be really good moving forward if you're trying to avoid playing around this. D-Prison is always really good, maybe main or side to deal with heroes. You just have to be careful using it on Alias over the Shining. You want to hit their fusions with your D-Prisons. But yeah, there's still some decks that didn't see a lot of representation. I really would like to see more people trying out X-Sabers and even Karakuri. We had one Karakuri player, and I don't even think they did too poorly. I think they ended up finishing top 12, if I remember right. So I think Karakuri is definitely a really powerful deck that doesn't really see a whole lot of play. So I you know, as the format starts to grow, I'm excited to see kind of where things evolve. I do think right now heroes are really powerful, and Gravekeepers are also really powerful, which makes TG stun become a lot more viable in the meta because it has such good matchups into these decks. Otherwise, Tengu Plants is just something you always need to be prepared for when playing in these tournaments. So siding ratios of Max C is really good, but then maybe now, like, we're seeing a lot of people kind of shift to adding like attack negation into their Tengu Plant builds, so it's kind of smart to maybe think about that or consider that when playing against them, that could be an option now. I think usually if you're aware that this could happen, you don't get blown out by it as much as if you just don't think it's there. So that's another thing to think about. But other than that, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you guys think about the top 8, what you guys think about the deck list, and, you know, maybe your takes on what you think this means for the meta as things progress. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe and have a great time dueling today.